He is a renowned academic, an alumni of the, I'll say, expertise graduating class, because we have a lot of them. He holds a PhD in development economics from Manchester University, an MSc in development economics from Warwick University, MPhil and BA economics from the University of Ghana, our alma mater. Now, he has published extensively, and his research interests in SMEs, development finance, migration, poverty analysis, remittances issues. So without much ado, and I'm not going to waste time because I'm going to be as the moderator, without wasting time, I'd like us to, with a round of applause, welcome our own Professor Peter Korting of the class. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. All protocols observed. Let me welcome you to this beautiful edifice constructed by as part of his corporate social responsibility to the department. I haven't seen any chairman turn down the offer or the call to chair a function, and I won't be there. So I accept and I'm honored to be called upon to chair this function. The topic is very, very important to us. Education is key, and I think it's very relevant. We are quite happy to have one of our own come all the way from the UK to deliver this lecture. UG 93, we are 25 years, and we've come a long way. With the University of Ghana 70 years anniversary, so it is quite an important event for us. I wish all of us fruitful deliberations, and I believe we will leave here with a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much.
So, to our agenda for today, I would like to invite one of our own, Ms. Amabewa, Senior Director, Government Relations, Newmont Mining, to come and introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akwe. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker for this morning, in the person of our classmate, colleague, and dear friend, Dr. Kwadwo Osei Nyame Jr., otherwise known as Bolerino. Dr. Osei Nyame is a professor of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, at the University of London, UK. He holds a PhD in English and African Studies from Oxford University. Among his proudest academic accomplishments, I must say, is his bachelor's degree in English and History is from the famed and celebrated University of Ghana 1993 year group. No challenger. A product of Achimota, Dr. Osei Nyame is widely published in academic journals on Black African culture and diaspora studies. His interests are creative writing, sports recreation, and entertainment. An avid sports fan, he moonlights of Sports Afrique and as the #1 disc jockey for the University of Ghana 1993 year group. And his music is numero uno. He is also the of our very own Juliana, known to the 1993 year group as our Julia baby. A 2018 graduate of our dear alma mater, the University of Ghana, so it runs in the family. It is my proud and singular honor to welcome today's speaker, my dear friend and University of Ghana 1993 year group mate, Dr. Kwadwo Osei Nyame.
Thank you so very much, Ohemakese Amabewa. I just want to start the University of Ghana 1993 year group. We have our founder here today, Mr. Kesley Coleman, otherwise known as Apeletu. He brought the idea, and then absent today is our chairman, Robert Oseidak, or Professor Robert Oseidak, who unfortunately is not with here. But I just want to thank my mates and my colleagues for giving me this opportunity to present. I think that to present is an honor in itself, and I just want to say that I really appreciate that. I also want to thank every other person who's come here today to listen to this lecture, and hopefully we can go away with really interesting. But before I start to talk, I just want to spend about 2-3 minutes setting the context of the lecture. A couple of years ago, as a student returning home to Ghana for a at Oxford University, I walked towards the Department of English, where I had my BA degree. And as I entered the department, I saw images of great white European literary scholars. Yes, and the Keats and the Wordsworths and all of those people, for those of you who've done some English literature, they were there displayed, before the student enters the department. And I was going to give a lecture that day. So it occurred to me that what would it be like for a student who's a young undergraduate entering that department, and instead of seeing all these white people, Shakespeare and his clique, seeing people like Amatedu, Toni Morrison, Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, achievers. So I mentioned that in the course of my lecture. And thankfully, when I returned again to talk to my department a couple of years later, I saw that a few of the faces had been put there. And that for me in itself represents partly which is the subject of the university as a space for creative and transformational education, and how we can use our own ability and our own capacity to transform things around us and not necessarily always go along with what's established. And again, I noticed that at the graduation ceremony of Friday, we had a guest speaker who was a brilliant achiever who talked to the students about how to achieve. And one thing that struck me as I sat down was that many of the achievers, or almost all of the achievers who were mentioned as examples, were European. There wasn't a single African who was mentioned in there. And then I thought, oh, okay, this actually tallies with the content of my presentation today.
It is important that we begin to pay serious attention to the study of the works of African descent scholars, several of whom were political activists and whose life stories teach us crucial lessons in attaining freedom and self-rehabilitation. Amilcar Cabral, before he wrote Revolution in Guinea and Cape Verde, toured the whole of Guinea as an agronomist. Cabral, far ahead of many of Africa's teacher revolutionaries, was therefore very well grounded in the sociology, history, and culture of his people. No wonder then that he was able to lead a successful revolution against the Portuguese until he was assassinated. Mentioning Cabral reminds me of Patrice Lumumba, another African leader who was assassinated by Western forces seeking to kill the African dream for self-emancipation. Let me proceed to use the example of Lumumba, and one might include here even Thomas Sankara and more recently Muammar al-Gaddafi, as a leader whose life story necessitates a complete and thorough reappraisal of the review of the way in which we engage as educators and scholars and intellectuals with the notion of Western democracy and the manner in which it unfolds, even in our present time. Our very existence at the socioeconomic, political, and cultural levels have come to be determined and regulated by this concept, this phenomenon, so much so that naturally Western democracy, that is within our curricula one of the most definitive subjects, cutting as it does across many disciplines. But then, the provocative question that I want to pose today is, have we very deeply scrutinized its merits and demerits for Africa and for Africans? I very much doubt that we have. And I think it is very highly problematic the way and manner in which it has been imposed on us and how it has evolved and worked. For me personally, and as far as I can see, for the majority of our citizens and peoples, it is a phenomenon that we need to take a more careful look at. The story of Patrice Lumumba and the Belgian Congo is deeply illustrative of the point I want to make. The testimony of Ghanaian writer Ayi Kweyama, taken from his work, The Eloquence of the Scribes, a memoir on the sources and resources of African literature, is instructive in this regard. And I'm quoting briefly from this work in a chapter called Lumumba, African Dream, European Nightmare. The problem Lumumba faced right from the start was that European and American corporations and the governments serving them were determined to use every means, murder included, to prevent any African committed to African as opposed to European control of African resources for the achievement of African prosperity from ever attaining power. Much was expected to depend on the outcome of the first colony-wide elections in the Congo. It was clear that Lumumba lacked the kind of official Belgian and foreign patronage that could facilitate electoral campaigning. Because the so-called moderate Africans, those who could be trusted to continue placing European interests above African human rights, were heavily backed by money and administrative influence. While Lumumba had to work with what little material support he could glean from an impoverished, if numerous, constituency, the moderates were expected to beat him. So there was considerable consternation and surprise all around among European and American officials when Lumumba won the first democratic elections in the battered territory. Democratically elected or not, it became clear that the charismatic leader was not going to be allowed to implement his program of African equality, education, health, and prosperity. In the end, he was assassinated through the efforts of security and police services from Belgium, France, Britain, and America. The one African in the Congo who showed a clear promise of mobilizing a democratic electorate behind a program of peaceful and equitable social change was murdered by countries ceaselessly trumpeting their self-proclaimed democratic virtues. They killed the one African politician who was committed to getting all African children into schools and universities, ensuring adequate health care for all, and using the resources of the Congo to generate the world that would make such a vast program of human improvement feasible. Now, if we look critically at the situation of Africa today, especially with our so-called underdeveloped and third world status, how come it does not seem to occur to us at all to question the phenomenon of Western democracy as it has been institutionalized? In Africa, in our work as educators, particularly from an angle similar to that which I'm pursuing here, and particularly if we consider that most of Africa's progressively minded leaders have at different times in our social and political history suffered fates similar to Lumumba. Here one can mention Thomas Sankara of Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso and Muammar al-Qaddafi of Libya. And prior to them, the likes of Amilcar Cabral of Guinea and Cape Verde and Steve Biko of South Africa, who were all eliminated. How come we have not within our educational practice raised issues about the real value of Western democracy for our peoples? And let me be very clear here what I mean. To have a group of largely Western educated elites, mainly products of a neo-colonial Western educational system, provide alternative and rotating government and leadership to Africa and Africans is not, in my view, any way democratic. I'm saying that that process of ballot changing and changing this to that, etc., is not in and of itself inherently democratic. We have to look at the end product of that process. We must ask ourselves simply the question, why it is that governments are changed every 4 years or 8 years since independence, leaving aside the era of military rule, but that our stagnated and arrested development remains basically the same. It matters not whether particular political parties and their leaders are seen at different points within our electoral and voting systems to have performed relatively better than others. This is not the point at all. What we really have to be looking at here and scrutinizing and dealing with as academics, scholars, and intellectuals, teachers who pass down knowledge to students who then in turn sometimes become teachers, is the fact, and I say the fact very boldly and confidently, that Western democracy, as far as I've witnessed it and experienced it in my lifetime, has been detrimental and destructive to our people. All of the major achievements and benefits of this phenomenon, taking the sociocultural and political history of Ghana into consideration, are, in my view, restricted to a very teeny-weeny, tiny minority of educated elites and their relatives and acolytes and acquaintances. In Ghana, for example, we have changed governments over the years since independence, but I'm sure most of us will agree with me that when we look around us, there is a lot of sterility and stagnation. Whether it is the filth that surrounds us, the poor drainage systems that cause floods and the loss of lives, the indisciplined and unsupervised putting up of buildings and other structures in illegitimate places, whether it is the phenomenon of sikedie basa 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 basa, To borrow the opposite and now immortalized because proven words of fireman Country Songo. Oja, which happens and occurs not only within our sports and has been responsible for its decline, but occurs at almost every level of our sociocultural and political fabric. Whether it is the fact that parents and guardians and relatives spend huge amounts on educating their wards to the university level, but these wards fail to get jobs afterwards. Whether it is the fact that our legal and judicial systems operate obsolete, antiquated, colonial, anti-human rights laws that enable someone who smokes weed or marijuana or a petty time thief to spend 5 or 10 years in prison without trial, while a crooked politician and people in positions of trust and power steal and embezzle millions of dollars and cedis from our people and go scot-free. Whether or not we have a system where parliamentarians on different sides of the political divide can come together under a system called Western democracy and pass laws and policies that facilitate them with monies for expensive cars. While the very roads on which these cars are driven remain in a terrible state and sometimes constitute death traps, even as our hospitals lack basic resources such as ambulances or beds, which then subsequently lead to preventable deaths, especially for the poor, etc., etc. Whether it is this or that, I think we have arrived at that point in our history when our courses and curricula, instead of simply glorifying or validating the virtues of this or that foreign philosophy or cultural or economic system, or elaborating the value of this or that Western approach to doing things, we have come to the point in our troubled history where we need to pose and deal with the harsh, concrete problems of a traumatized existence. Another way of putting it is that we have arrived at that moment in history where everything that we design and teach at all levels of our education, as much as we can, must be directly related to how we can evaluate and critique and find solutions to the problems we have. We have reached that stage, so to speak, where our need for a rehabilitative curricula is most pressing. I'm not talking about producing yet other levels of economic or social or political theory. For the sake of it, I'm referring to how we can unearth and excavate steady paradigms and narratives that open the eyes of our people to the rot and degradation and suffering around us. It would seem to be a near impractical task, not because it is inherently impossible to transform our university system and our society and be more creatively and progressively oriented as far as the relationship between our work and our society is concerned. It is made the more challenging and more difficult largely as a result of human obstacles in our path. In Ayi Kweyameh's novel of 1969 Fragments, the protagonist, Baako, returns from his studies abroad with a firm desire and resolve to contribute to national development. Baako has a vision to help rebuild Ghana, and with his creative vision and his talent and skill as an artist, Baako is presented as a very conscientious citizen, a man interested in improving the status of his country, which has suffered years of post-independent and neo-colonial disorder. In the words of his former school teacher from Achimota, Mr. Okran, Baako is a very capable man who is qualified for a position in the Ghanaian civil service. Yet, this energetic and dynamically creative young man is frustrated and his application unnecessarily delayed when he applies for a job. When Baako and Okran visit one of the big men in Ghana, who through our whom you know culture can help Baako get the job he needs, and Okran laments and complains about the painful and frustrating experiences that Baako has suffered. The big man, described in the novel as the principal secretary, in response to their complaints, tells them directly, all this is beside the point. And then adds, I'm quoting from Ama's novel of 1969, we don't have modern systems here. This country doesn't work that way. If you come back thinking you can make things work in any smooth, efficient way, you just get a complete waste of your time, and it's not worth bothering about. Unfortunately, the young man will also be finding out that making a go of life means forgetting all the beautiful stuff they teach in the classroom. It is very different the way things really work. In anger and driving furiously back home from the appointment with the principal secretary, Okran fumes. You heard him. You're supposed to forget everything good you ever learned. It's all nothing to him and to the others like him. You'll be agreeing with him all too soon. I hate these stupid Ghanaian big shots. They know things don't work, but they are happy to sit on top of the mess all the time. Now he feels he's done us a great favor, and that's the way he wants it. You are expected to be grateful. The machinery doesn't work, except as a special favor for special cases. But they know what they are doing in the long run. You know, back home, what you're getting here is not a chance to do any useful work. End of quotation. It is significant to note that these are statements about Ghana made in a novel published in 1969, but any honest Ghanaian with open ears and eyes will tell you that this portrait of the Ghanaian system is very largely true as of Ghana of 25th July, 11 a.m. 2018. All of this provides further reason why it is time we became more intellectually creative and adventurous and designed and taught courses that directly address the problems and issues that we face as a people. This is the kind of consciousness that we must seek to generate among our students and our people. The space of the university needs to be transformed from one that simply celebrates old, obsolete, unworkable systems to properly incorporate a problem-solving approach. It is high time we stopped paying obeisance and alliance and constantly genuflecting to Western thinkers and writers. Even our political discourse is full of that kind of intellectual groveling and ideological subservience. Someone talking about African development is more likely to mention to you and cite for you some Western professor, when right here we have works such as Africa Must Unite, and let me make this point very clear. We should also shed that crudely crass, intellectually hypocritical, counterproductive, and highly unprogressive attitude, where we will not teach or cite Nkrumah's Africa Must Unite or his neocolonialism because as students or teacher scholars, we belong to a different political tradition. Nkrumah may be faulted for his introduction of the PDA, which put Dankwa in prison and led to his death, and we may also accost him for his one-party state system he attempted to foist on us. However, none of these detract from the fact that he had wonderful insights based on lived experience for the African Revolution and for African developmental economics that are important for us. The same applies to the work of that other great intellectual giant, perhaps Ghana's greatest ever in the present time, J.B. Dankwa. Whatever we may think of Dankwa and whatever we may not like about him, we should not fail to refuse to tap the great wisdom in his many works. In other words, we should take the best of our intellectual ancestors and combine them for our contemporary benefit and progress. In Life and Lessons, Marcus Garvey, one of Africa and the Black world's most important human rights agitator, activists, and philosophers, makes the following observation. I'm quoting Garvey. We must canonize our own saints, create our own martyrs, and elevate to positions of fame and honor black men and women who have made their distinct contributions to our racial history. Sojourner Truth is worthy of a place of sainthood alongside Joan of Arc. Crispus Attucks and George William Gordon are entitled to the halo of martyrdom with no less glory than the martyrs of any other race. Toussaint Louverture's brilliancy as a soldier and statesman outshone that of Cromwell and Napoleon and Washington. Hence, he is entitled to the highest place as a hero among men. Africa has produced countless men and women in war and peace whose luster and bravery outshine that of any other people. Thus, why do we not see the good and perfection in them? This is one philosophical and intellectual model that we must aspire to. To complement Garvey's statement above, I would add that Yaa Asantewaa is as much a revolutionary as Joan of Arc. Queen Amina of Zazzau and Queen Nzinga of Angola, the amazing queens of Benin and Dahomey, and the Igbo woman who fought the Aba Women's War against the British colonialists, deliberately misrepresented by colonial writers as Aba Women's Riots. All of these women, these powerful writers and historical actors and agents of change and transformation, who at different points in our historical life were able to stand up, speak for, and fight for us as African people. Queen Nani of the Cro-Mantains and the Maroons in Jamaica, who was born in Ghana, and Priestess Queen Nyabingi, nicknamed the Lioness of Uganda, etc., are more important for the African child than Queen Victoria or Queen Elizabeth. Or Marie Antoinette of France. Our philosophy courses should be full of the works of the likes of Théophile Obenga and W.E.B. Du Bois and J.B. Dankwa. When we teach democracy and freedom, we should be referencing Queen Nzinga of Angola or Aminau of Zazzau and highlighting their historic achievements. We should be drawing the attention of our students to C.L.R. James's The Black Jacobins, Toussaint Louverture and the San Dominico Revolution. Published as far back as 1938, a story that celebrates one of the first, if not the very first, of the successful revolutions by black people in the Western Hemisphere. Within literature and African cultural studies, a novel such as the African American writer Toni Morrison's Beloved, which is about slavery, potentially teaches the African child more about slavery than officially whitewashed accounts by Caucasian authors. Malcolm X, having lived and suffered racism in America, wrote and philosophized on race and racism, presented many authoritative statements on social reform. The autobiography of Malcolm X, introduced to my 1990 English undergraduate class by Professor Ann Adams of Cornell University in a course on African American literature, was a real eye-opener. Subsequently, it led to me following and discovering more. Malcolm X should be compulsory reading in our sociology and politics classes. So too should Marcus Garvey, already cited, whose chapters, The Slave Trade and Other Chapters, and the Negro's Place in World Reorganization, in his monumentally classic work, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, or Africa for the Africans, are essential readings for any serious students of African history. Indeed, that entire study should be approached with the zealousness and devotion with which our people approach the study of the Bible. W.E.B. Du Bois, a great sociologist, is not an author you are likely to find on sociology courses in African universities. Du Bois, famous author of The Souls of Black Folk, published as far back as 1903, is the greatest sociologist of all time. Du Bois produced such works as The Philadelphia Negro, was an activist and human rights agitator. His The World in Africa, an inquiry into the part which Africa has played in world history, is a brilliant work on international relations, politics, and race relations. Yet you can be sure that this work by him, or his Black Reconstruction in America, and his The Sociology of the Black Man, will hardly be found as reading material on our sociology course lists. Instead, we are more likely to read about European authors like Durkheim, whatever his name is, and Max Weber, when it comes to sociology. Weber. Okay, whatever. I don't even want to know how to pronounce it correctly. Max Weber. I hear the Germans make WV. That's why I made it Max Weber. Weber. Okay, so then I was right, but it's always good to be corrected. Nonetheless. Okay, so, but these people are not directly relevant to us. I mean, the Weber section. Nnamdi Azikiwe with his numerous studies on nationalism and Pan-Africanism and the African Revolution. F.K. Fiawo with his Fifth Landing Stage. Efua Theodora Sutherland with a socially insightful place, Foriwa 1962, Edufa 1967, and The Marriage of Anansiwa 1975. Ama Tedu with a culturally rich and profound play dramas, Anoa and The Dilemma of a Ghost. And indeed her entire literary corpus, and J.B. Dankwa with his several disquisitions on culture and religion and philosophy and politics and nation building, such as his historic, I'm quoting Dankwa's books now, the historic speeches and writings on Ghana, or his equally illustrative and instructive, as determined by its very title, The Ghanaian Establishment, Its Constitution, Its Detentions, Its Traditions, Its Justice and Statecraft, and Its Heritage of Ghanaianism, edited by the late Venerable Professor Albert Odubuahin. John Mensah Saba with his Fanti Constitution, and J.E. Kesley Herford with his deeply philosophical novel Ethiopia Unbound of 1911. A powerful narrative of African emancipation, published long before the much more celebrated Things Fall Apart of 1958 by Nigeria's Chinua Achebe, and set partially in London, where you have the Fanti Ghanaian African protagonist character, Kwame taking on Western philosophy and philosophers and proving the validity and the wisdom of inherent in African philosophical perspectives. These and many more from our rich intellectual traditions are the kinds of writers whose work must be recuperated, retrieved, and disseminated within the minds of our students. And this should be done in a cross-disciplinary manner, so that Ama Tedu's brilliant works are not taught only as part of a literature course, but can find themselves well and adequately represented in history courses, for example. Let me make it once again clear that I am not suggesting at all that we are doing nothing. Hence, I'm not making these statements from an intellectually supercilious position. And I appeal to don't ask me to explain what supercilious means, because you're likely to do that. Now, let me conclude with the topic of religion. With our very deeply anemic spirituality, with our seeming inability to make a difference between the need to acknowledge and respect and maybe even celebrate the fact that we have a maker or makers, and the pure religious bokosness and zealousness that we seem to have embraced. Long before any Obronin came to Africa to preach to our Nanankanswanum as missionaries, we had an idea of God, or at the very least of a supreme being. It would seem, however, judging from the available evidence, that within our religious dispensation, Western religious structures have been superimposed on Africans who have generally not questioned all challenge them but taking them at face value. This has led to us embracing religion, and I'm addressing certain versions of Christianity here, with a certain fundamentalist fervor and fanaticism. I think that this involves a very unconscious and uncritical ingestion of religion that we mistake for spirituality. Let me illustrate with a quotation from Achebe's world-famous and world-historic novel, Things Fall Apart, where an encounter between the indigenous Igbo and the invading Christians highlights what may be described as a crisis of soul and identity. I'm quoting now from Achebe. I'm quoting from this one, but I typed it out here. When they had all gathered, of course, you can see this is a massacred version. I can hear the memory. When they had all gathered, the white man began to speak to them. He spoke through an interpreter who was an Igbo man, though his dialect was different and harsh to the ears of Mbanta. Many people laughed at his dialect and the way he used the words strangely. Instead of saying myself, he always said my buttocks. But he was a man of commanding presence, and the clansmen listened to him. He said he was one of them, as they could see from his color and his language. The other 4 black men were also his brothers, although one of them did not speak Igbo. The white man was also their brother because they were all sons of God, and he told them about the new God, this new God, the creator of the world and all the men and women. He told them that they worshipped false gods, gods of wood and stone. A deep murmur went through the crowd when he said this. He told them that the true God lived on high, and that all men, when they died, went before him for judgment. Evil men and all the heathen who in their blindness bowed to wood and stone were thrown into fire that burned like palm oil. But good men who worship the true God, the new God, the white God, live forever in his happy kingdom. We have been sent by this great God to ask you to leave your wicked ways and false gods and turn to him so that you may be saved when you die, he said. And that ends the quotation. I ask here today, even as we reappraise the manner in which we learn and teach, where is our Chukwu as a response to this statement which seeks to reduce pre-colonial and so-called African traditional religions to the worship of false gods and gods of wood and stone within the discourses of religion and spiritual development? Indeed, is Chukwu the supreme being and creator of the universe within Igbo cosmology, not the same one who also created all men and women and things under the earth and the sun? Is it not for that very reason that the Igbo conceptualized and described Chukwu as Chukwudigbo, which translates literally into English as the God who has always existed or the God who has always been? If this is the case, why have we allowed ourselves to be spiritually coerced into thinking when we worship Chukwu that we are worshiping a false God? Indeed, our Olodumare, the supreme being in Yoruba belief, or Oboade, the most high being and creator and ruler of heaven and earth, the descriptor for God among the Akan folk of Ghana, not similar to the Igbo Chukwu. Are all 3 gods not equivalent to the Western God who is described in the extract that I have read from Things Fall Apart as the new God, the creator of the world and of all men and women? Amoria, and so on and so forth, we said and we say in Akan. Indeed, our forebears developed the philosophical saying, no one teaches a child God, etc., etc. All of which simple but deep sayings were developed out of our interactions with our maker and in tune with our environment. In Ewe, the supreme being is referred to as Mausobolisa. And in Ga, we have the name Ata Nanyongmo. In fact, African appreciation of religion and spirituality and belief in a higher being was so far advanced in certain areas and cultures as to democratize even the notion of creation. So that the Ga Ata Nanyongmo actually conceptualizes the God force as both female and male, thus ensuring, even within the Ga and by extension other African religious dispensations, that the idea that we humans were created by both a superior female and male force. The same notion of a balanced gender God power force extends into the ever cosmological rendition of God. But these days, what do we have? An overzealous and sometimes misleading overfocus on the Christ figure to the detriment of our own image of God. I'm not suggesting, and let me also make a caveat here, I'm not an atheist, and I'm not an agnostic. I believe in a supreme being, but African version. I'm not suggesting that we forget completely about about Yesu Christo or Yeshua the Christ. But if you went deep into African history, you would realize that we already even had the figure of a rising savior, Osiris rising, in ancient Egyptian mythology. Osiris was a Christ-like figure who preceded the notion of Jesus as the resurrected Messiah that we have today. But we do not see the connection between these hard, deeply researched facts and our elevated spirituality. And I was actually going to bring in some, material from some research that goes back to our history. But this subject, when you touch on it, and when you go too deep, it's a very thin, hazy line between what you're trying to say and how you can get your people to understand what you want to say, because some people can become totally alienated if you approach it a certain way. So I decided to hold back a bit on that aspect of it. So we do not see the connection between these hard, deeply researched historical facts and our elevated spirituality, an overdose of prayer and cacophonic noise in all parts of the society, with very little innovative and creatively derived transformative action based on our relationship with our maker or makers, such as when our ancestors were able to develop all these philosophies in communion with our maker. These days we've lost that totally, and it's just one-sided, a particular direction in which we've been led by the Western missionary, and that's totally different. And I think that this is counterproductive and detrimental to us. Our pastors are getting richer and richer, while we, the congregation, are getting poorer and poorer, and being asked to wait on God for a miracle. We should be addressing even this anomalous and spiritually counterproductive state of affairs within our educational and socializing practices. But even more to the point is that fundamentally and first of all, we are praying to a God that does not look like us. And so if the same person who took your ancestors into slavery and dehumanized and brutalized you is asking you to pray to his God and is giving you an economic and a political and a cultural system that was designed to make you simply a hewer of wood and a drawer of water, why the hell do you think that that person's economic, political, and religious system can liberate you? That is a question I leave with you. But before you attempt to answer me, I want to end with the emphatic statement that we are in the state in which we are because we have succumbed ideologically. We have succumbed intellectually. And hence we have succumbed spiritually too, in every possible way. It is time for us to creatively arise and transform ourselves in all areas and departments of our lives. The space of the university provides as much an arena as any for this rehabilitative, deconstructive, and reconstructive work. Boys are brave. Stephanie.